Welcome to Fright Club, the horror movie battle ring where you vote for the winner. I'm your host, Zach Cherry, and in this week's match, 2000's Hollow Man will take on 2020's The Invisible Man to find out which one is the best updated version of the H.G. Wells classic. Released 20 years apart, both of these modernized 21st century reboots share a common theme of having its titular terrorizer using scientific and technological advancements to victimize women without detection. The differences being that while Hollow Man is a 90s holdover sci-fi thriller that depicts the psychological unraveling of its aggressor through the effects of an experiment gone awry, The Invisible Man is a suspense-oriented melodrama that opts for an alternative narrative showcasing the same mental deterioration from the perspective of the victim. Both films enjoyed a successful box office run at the time of their respective release dates, with The Invisible Man already slated for a spin-off and a sequel. And while Hollow Man did receive an Academy Award nomination for Best Visual Effects and a direct-to-video follow-up, this Paul Verhoeven blockbuster seems to have become largely forgotten these days. So why is that? Before we go any further, do me a favor and toss this video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below which movie you think is best. If you're new here and want to vote in the next Fright Club match, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and make sure to turn on the bell notifications, setting them to all. That way you can get alerts to remind you when I drop that poll. How did you guys vote in this matchup? Let's find out and get this fright started. The Invisible Man employs a slow but focused crawl as we follow Cecilia Cass's perpetual attempts to outrun the shadows of her abusive relationship and her struggle to maintain sanity in the face of some truly heinous gaslighting. This sympathetic protagonist's immediate reality is primarily what drives the action of the movie, inviting the audience along for the mystery as she uncovers the continuing transgressions of her allegedly deceased ex-boyfriend, never begging the question of who is doing this, so much as how is this being done? Tensions escalate until finally, amid a handful of convenient plot turns and some seriously jarring discoveries, this character-oriented tale dispatches some overdue poetic justice, concluding in a manner that seems to uplift its heroine to a relative freedom from where she started this journey. Hollow Man, on the other hand, establishes its own straightforward storytelling technique in a brutal prelude that foreshadows pretty clearly what's to come as we follow an arguably unsympathetic central character in his selfish efforts to seize control of a Pentagon-funded experiment to achieve invisibility, only to inflict dire consequences on his colleagues after making himself the first human test subject. What drives this near mindless immorality parade is not so much a plot as, well, just things happening, as our lead male character circles the drain of humanity consequence-free for the duration of the film, until finally his team bands together to do something to stop him, designating this movie's tawdry exploits and its high-voltage action as the real touchstones here. While Hollow Man is lighter, more fast-paced and exhilarating, The Invisible Man's slow burn plot definitely pays off during key story beats, allowing me to become more engrossed in the action. So for that reason, I gotta give this round to The Invisible Man. What sets The Invisible Man apart is how it's built around one really well-developed character, played superbly by Elisabeth Moss, whose performance never fails to command our attention and empathy, painting a realistic picture of a fragile shell of a person, broken down by years of psychological torment. For his research, writer-director Leigh Whannell conducted interviews with real-life domestic violence counselors and survivors of physical abuse in order to accurately portray the dynamic of the film's major relationship. But while there's no wasted opportunity to delve deeper into Cecilia's experience, there isn't much time spared to gain insight into the secondary characters, leaving the audience to sometimes question why certain people do what they're doing. However, Adrian, the film's antagonist, obstructs the perception of others throughout his time on screen, literally and figuratively, creating one of the movie's strongest assets with a villain that we're encouraged to imagine as others describe him, until the mask comes off, allowing us to see him at the end, finally putting a face to everything that's led to this final confrontation. But where Adrian is elusive and concealed, Hollow Man's Sebastian Cain is kind of an open book, whose obvious lies and obtrusive recklessness are never actually identified as side effects of the injections causing his invisibility, leaving us to ponder whether he's being corrupted by the serum or if his cloaked form is just unlocking his own innermost unsavory impulses. The supporting cast are left to either shake their heads, suffer various forms of assault, or ignorantly bumble through as admittedly stock characters, characters, adopting a collective acting style rooted in posturing and indicating, as nobody on screen feels like an actual person, but rather the suggestion of one. And while the hyperbolic performances are entertaining to watch, they leave a lot to be desired, as the movie tends to be very inconsistent with whose story is being told here. I would be more forgiving to the characters of Hollow Man if they were so bad they were good, but they're just kind of bad. There's very little satire present and even less nuance to their relationships, and let's be honest, when your competition is Elisabeth Moss, you're facing a pretty steep uphill battle. Although The Invisible Man's overall tone firmly plants its feet in a reality that audiences could conceivably reach out and touch, the cinematic presentation is particularly clean and at times quite stunning, exhibiting powerful angles which only engross us deeper into Cecilia's emotional unraveling. The visuals are complemented even further, not just by Benjamin Wallfish's ominous score, punctuating the high screeches and low moans of our heroine's psyche, but also characterized in the sudden, intense bursts and shuddering static ripples of the film's intuitive sound design, stressing an inorganic technological presence. Of course, time may have to be the determining factor as to the sophistication of the film's computer-generated shots, but in terms of the green screen bodysuit effects, their greatest benefit is what they afford Elisabeth Moss in her portrayal, allowing her to interact with and respond to an actual actor or stunt performer rather than just a blank space. Taking a different approach, Hollow Man boasts an abundance of virtual set pieces, making it unquestionably evident that this movie was released in the wake of an already booming CGI revolution. But while a lot of the effects haven't aged particularly well in the last 20 years, what perhaps garnered the film its 2001 Oscar nomination for Best Visual Effects may ironically be attributed to the imagery you can't see rather than what you can, as those distinct moments actually look quite remarkable, with all things considered. The film also maintains its own audible merits with a Hitchcockian score by Jerry Goldsmith, whose sweeping melodies and haunting cadences seem to examine and question the boundaries of scientific exploration all on its own, making these musical accompaniments probably better than this movie deserved. After all, we are talking about a film directed by Paul Verhoeven, a man whose unbridled appetite for sexual exploitation and insatiable predilection for broad theatrical strokes could only have thrived in the 90s. I'm assuming this isn't adjusted for inflation, but Hollow Man had a budget of $95 million, while The Invisible Man cost a mere $7 million to make. Hollow Man certainly doesn't look terrible outside of some anatomy chart looking CGI, and this might be due to the fact that we're talking about a movie that came out 20 years later, but Invisible Man looks expensive, and knowing that it cost them only a fraction of Hollow Man's budget, I'd say that The Invisible Man easily takes this round. The Invisible Man earned the distinction of becoming the first bona fide success with critics and at the box office after a string of failed attempts by Universal to reboot any of its horror legacy monsters, and rightly so, since this movie can't seem to stop expanding its audience. Its still thriving impact is due in no small part to the continued cultural relevance in a post-Me Too era, as the film ultimately excavates the story of the woman being victimized rather than the story of its titular male character. And while there isn't anything particularly innovative when it comes to the invisible monster subgenre, as we've seen all these hijinks before, the movie does offer a new spin on how this vintage villain has obtained his disappearing powers, which is successfully built up as a mystery over the first half of the film's runtime. Adversely, we have Hollow Man, whose greatest success might be that it's an ideal contender for the watch list of anyone teaching a course on the celluloid male gaze. Complete with the last-minute female protagonist, the audience has no built-in motivation to root for, since she's enabled every destructive act committed by the movie's appointed villain. But we're not entirely lacking for worthwhile moments that intrigue or entertain, as amid the one-note characters, corny one-liners, and clear priority given to its more sensational aspects, this uncomplicated balls-out romp can still be categorized as a pure shut-your-brain-off popcorn flick, which is nothing really to be ashamed of after all, as Hollow Man is pretty much a perfect version of what it is, if an R-rated big-budget swell of extravagance and energy is what you're looking for. I'm really tempted to give this round to Hollow Man for the sheer fact that it has no pretensions about itself, and I would even reason that it has a high rewatchability factor, as I haven't enjoyed it more than I did after this last viewing. However, I think that the original H.G. Wells' Invisible Man concept lends itself way better to suspense, and Leigh Whannell crafts together what I would consider to be more of the horror movie between the two. Rather than focusing on outlandish special effects or a high body count, The Invisible Man opts for a sharper concentration on the perils of being hunted and a traumatic loss of life, offering only 3 confirmed fatalities. That isn't to say the film is completely devoid of violence though, as we do receive a lengthy, well-choreographed shootout sequence during Cecilia's escape from the asylum, where injuries range from non-lethal to undetermined. However, each indisputable death of the movie influences the course of the action in a major way that's uncharacteristic of your average blood and guts fare, elevating this to a tier that can attract both mainstream audiences as well as the respect of die-hard horror fans. The same can't be said of Hollow Man though, where the kills are all pretty hollow themselves, containing no emotional reverberations felt by the surviving characters, and instead permitting the audience to luxuriate in the movie's horrific flourishes. But that should come as a plus for your typical gorehound, as the movie shifts into full-on slasher mode during its climax, appealing to our baser appetites in a blood-soaked high-octane splendor. Whether these victims are extricated through practical tableaus or prominent CGI centerpieces, the familiarity of the assembly line kill formula can probably hold its own as moviegoer comfort food for many years to come. While I definitely will not advocate that a horror movie needs to have a high body count in order to be considered good, I actually think Hollow Man deserves this round. The death set pieces are pretty memorable and spectacular here, even if they are somewhat over-the-top ridiculous. But hey, if you're disappointed I didn't give The Invisible Man a perfect 5 out of 5, maybe they'll up the body count in the sequel. But now that you know how I feel, let's find out which one you voted for. 4,599 people voted between The Invisible Man and Hollow Man, and with 80% of the vote, the majority of you thought that The Invisible Man was the better adaptation. With my score of 4-1 in favor of the IM, it looks like we agree with each other this week. Mostly. I will say, in Hollow Man's defense, it's not terrible. Go check it out. Next week, I'll be serving an amuse-bouche of everybody's favorite cannibalistic doctor when Silence of the Lambs takes on Hannibal. I want to thank my Patreon supporter, Ideen Vega. If you'd like to support this channel or Fright Club, you can head over there for early access to new episodes. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.